Hi and welcome back to my channel. My name is Stephanie and this video is going to be improvements on interview technique, things that I wish I'd known going into my interview this past year. So the first thing that I wish that I had known going into this is that although everyone who applies by the UCAS deadline should have equal consideration, the universities can start interviewing quite early on, sort of the November time, and they will offer people places almost immediately. If you've scored high enough, you can get a place on the spot or within the next couple of days. And once those places are gone, they are gone, and only waiting list will be available until people accept their places at the universities, and as the system progresses. So the earlier that you can apply, the earlier that you can interview, the more chance there is that you will get an offer early on. And that is something that I wish I'd known. I think it was in the October time. I was on Instagram and I was looking at some other student midwives accounts and following their journeys back to when they were interviewing, and sort of calculating, and I was like, oh, these people were interviewing in November, December, and they were receiving offers in November, December, and that was sort of a big kick up the backside for me. And so I did actually apply in the October and my interview was in the December, so this wasn't necessarily as much of an issue for me. It was just something that I maybe wasn't necessarily aware of, and I know a lot of people that applied in this cycle maybe weren't aware of this, and there were people going to interviews in the sort of February, March time who at their interview were told there are no spaces available for this. This is now for the following cycle or the following intake. So just a heads up, the sooner that you apply, the better your chances are of not having to be delayed by another year or to the April or whenever a secondary intake happens. So that is the first thing that I would say to bear in mind. That's less interview based and more just in general. And then the second thing that I would say is about your personal statement. So I think when I had watched some videos on interviews, a lot of people had brought up your personal statement, but it really felt like I think maybe it was just the way that I interpreted it, but I thought it was like know your personal statement. Like if they quiz you on it, you should know the things. Whereas the reality and the way that I would say it is make sure that you emphasize your personal statement in the interview. So don't assume that interviewer has just read your personal statement. I feel like this was probably one of the biggest mistakes I made, because I spoke to a few people in the weeks after the interview. I had some chats because, as time went on and I wasn't receiving an offer I was playing everything over and over in my head. And, I think it was my husband who was like, well, you did mention your 10 years of breastfeeding experience in the interview, didn't you? And I was like, well, no, it was in my personal statement. And he's just staring at me and I'm like, oh, that was a mistake. That was definitely a mistake. It was like, I had put all of my best bits into that personal statement because that's, the thing that's going to grab them. But the part that I'd sort of forgotten was, on any day that they're interviewing or any week that they're interviewing, they could see, they could see 6 people that day. They could see 20 people that week. You don't know where you're coming in this interview process. And so don't assume that they will just know or they will have read. And it's easy. Humans make mistakes. Sometimes especially when there's a lot of people involved in something, you might get someone's application confused with the person in front of you. And so to help them and make it as simple and streamlined as possible, just remember all of your best parts from your personal statement. Make sure you bring them up in your interview. Go out of your way to sidetrack your way and loop everything back in. Because that was the biggest mistake I think I made. I just assumed that they knew all the best bits from my personal statement because, I had written it down and they had that information. And I think definitely, and probably to a lot of people that would go without saying, but to me it needed saying. So I would say that that's the biggest thing that I would improve on. So the next thing that I would say is practice interviews. Now there are some courses that you can go on. There's group sessions and one-to-one sessions with some wonderful people that you can find online. And if going into it again, I probably would give those a go. For whatever reason this time I just thought it wasn't necessary. Clearly it was. So practice interviews, but also if you can't afford to do those sessions, I would highly recommend applying to more than one university or having more than one interview. And whichever university you really, really, really want to go to, try and make that interview be the last interview that you have. So for me, I only applied to one university, and so I didn't think it was necessary to include any other choices, to go on any other interviews. But I hadn't been on a professional interview in 15 years, and I definitely could have benefited, and obviously now it's so obvious, I could have benefited from a practice or a dry run, as it were. And so applying again, I would definitely include more universities, and I would try to the best of my ability, if it's possible, push the university that I wanted to the end of that. So try and get the interviews for the other universities earlier, and have the one that you want at the end. Another thing that I wish that had been at the forefront of my mind going into the interview was buzzwords. They have to mark this interview. They have to score it. They have to have some way of ranking all of these candidates. And so if you can use as many buzzwords as possible in your interview and link them into all the different things. Personally, what I'll be doing next time is making a list of all the buzzwords I want to include in my interview, memorizing them. And then when I practice, I will be making sure that with each answer to any question in my practices, that I try and incorporate 3 or 4 of those buzzwords in, and just sort of get practiced in that, including these buzzwords in the same way that when they mark an essay, they see, you know, the topics, the buzzwords, the bits, and then they can mark it. Imagine that your interview is exactly the same. They have to mark this thing. The more buzzwords you can use, the more specialized terminology that you can use, the higher you can be marked on that interview. And then the last one that I just wanted to say that I really wish that I'd done differently, I think I was asked a question about current issues within midwifery, and I had wanted to, and I chickened out at the last minute, I'd wanted to talk about vaginal examinations. So I'd seen a lot on Instagram and things like that, how that there's this sort of swing away from doing physical examinations and trying to just observe from the outside to see how far dilated a woman is, from the line that runs up sort of their back. And I found that was fascinating, and I really wanted to say, you know, this is a topic current to midwifery that I find really interesting. You know, what's the university's policy on this? Like, is this something that you are also aware of? Is this something that you guys are taking into consideration? Is this something we're moving away from? Like, that is the conversation I wanted to have. And I think instead the conversation I had was just about continuity of carer, which is fine. It is a current issue in midwifery, and we had a nice little chat about it. But I feel like in an interview, you really want to set yourself apart from everybody else. And in hindsight, I feel like had I spoken about that instead of continuity of carer, they probably might have remembered me a bit better. It might have marked me outside of the norm, because continuity of carer is sort of a safe example. And so I think moving ahead, interviewing again, I will definitely be looking for an outlier example of a current issue within midwifery that I find really interesting and that I can be passionate about and show, just to help set you apart from all the other people that are being interviewed, because there are hundreds of people that they are interviewing, and if you can be somebody that they remember, again, that's really going to benefit you. So yeah, so those are some things that I wish that I had known or had given more consideration to, or they're just things that have been going round and round in my head for the past 6 months, of things that I wish I had done or said, or, you know. So I hope that is helpful to you in any way, and thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Thank you so much. Bye.